So we hope you enjoyed that lunch. And next to the stage, I would like to welcome Melissa Lee, the CEO of Massive Black Room 8, Miguel Doherty, executive producer at PUGA Studios, Aletheia O'Neil, the co-founder of Tether Games, and Patty Dingle, the global head of diversity and inclusion at Riot Games. And this panel will explore diversity themes and why DEI matters from a strategic standpoint. So, gang, come on up. And let's give him a round of applause.
Right.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. I'm super excited to talk about DEI, especially being an Asian female in the games industry. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I'd like to start off first by introducing our panel, a little bit more on them. I have my notes because I did not practice my lines.
It's all right.
So Miguel Doherty has been working as an entrepreneur in games for 10 years. He is the executive producer over at PUGA, and he's responsible for overseeing all producers and their projects. He's also part of the PUGA Diversity Committee, which is a key part of creating and managing the DEI agenda for the 150-ish PUGA teammates.
Yay, Miguel.
Then we have Aletheia O'Neil, who has been in the industry for 20 years, 20 plus years, and she's worked at big companies like Sony and Zynga, and has also founded multiple startups like Gravity Bear and Tether. For the last 8 years, she has been co-founder and COO of Tether Studios, one of the leading developers in the fledgling skill-based gaming space. And at Tether, she is focused on building products and teams that define the new sector of the game industry.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
And last but not least, Patty Nishimura Dingle, who has worked in the DEI space for 20 plus years. She currently serves as Riot Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, overseeing D&I initiatives and efforts to support Riot's 3,000 plus employees across Riot's 20 offices worldwide.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah.
I know, everyone has really busy schedules. First and foremost, I kind of want to talk about what is diversity, right? Like, what does that mean? We hear DEI. It's such like a hot word right now, right? You have DEI, I have DEI. What does it actually mean? And like, what is the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because I think a lot of times people kind of conflate and mix the three things up.
I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, folks. So, I like to think of it this way. Diversity is really like who's in the room, right? Counting all of your heads. Inclusion is really about making those heads count. Right? A little play on words there, but it really is inclusion. You're in the room, you feel valued. When you have those two things working together, you get equity, right? I think we all like to think that, we're all human, we're all the same, I treat everybody the same, but that simply just isn't true, right? People walk through the world very differently. Where they start in the world is very different. So when you activate those two things, hopefully you can get to an equitable place. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but that's kind of how we define it at Riot, and that's what drives the work that we're doing.
Nice. Anybody else?
I think the way Patty put it just makes a lot of sense. And that's super important, sort of differentiating diversity and inclusion as a whole, because some of McKinsey's studies also show that a lot of people can see a company being diverse, but not inclusive. Which is exactly what you pointed out is, well, yeah, they have the people, but they're not hearing actually everyone. So I think understanding that those key concepts make a lot of difference when you're aiming for your equity as a whole.
Yep. Oh.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm most excited about, the three of you being up here, is just kind of the diverse backgrounds that you all have, right? Miguel being a service provider in Brazil, Aletheia, a smaller developer in Nevada, and then Patty from behemoth publisher Riot. Where are you guys in terms of your diversity efforts? And what are you focusing on?
Okay, so I think one thing that sort of is a little bit different, like coming from Brazil, Latin America, etc. I think the entire way that, even the culture and the way that Brazil works is really a little bit different, because most of our of people there are considered non-white. We also have one of the greatest or is the biggest gay parade there. We also had a female president. So I think in that way, you have, a lot of diversity already in the culture and a lot of mixed people. So that puts PUGA into a very interesting place in terms of what you're creating, because it sort of is already in the country. And I think the main efforts and the thing that we've been doing is one thing that you pointed out, which is a diversity committee at PUGA, which is mostly focused in terms of what are the actions and actually maintaining the culture that we were able to create throughout these years of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I think for us at Tether, when we founded Tether, we approached it from a strategic mindset where, for us, building a small company, building a game, it was important for us to have a wide range of perspectives, because the fact of the matter is like the games, the products that we're building are for a wide range of users, and we feel that if we staff the creators of that content if we have a diverse set of developers, we're going to have a better chance of reaching a wider range of users. Because fact of the matter is the people who define themselves as gamers now are very different than they were 30 years ago. And if you want to target them, bringing in different perspectives during that creative process is going to help you increase your chances of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for us, it's simply global, right? We have a tremendous foundation at Riot. And Miguel, I know when we were prepping for this, even in Brazil and focusing on gender, but the intersectionality of like gender and ethnicity, we had a robust conversation about the Afro-Brazilian community. And for me, it's diversity within diversity, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all. So our job is to be flexible, whether we're working in Singapore or Shanghai, and also like kind of creating things that are scalable and sustainable horizontally across the organization. I think we can all, say that we're focused on talent, right? Bringing them in, the environment, the industry, et cetera. But then it's the nuances that are global that differentiate you. So we are very keen on that. And with our players in particular, like you were saying, Aletheia, they're constantly changing, right? And so we want to keep up with that and keep our eye on it. I like to say, keep our finger on the pulse, because players are going to expect that too at some point.
Totally. Given kind of where you guys are at and the steps that you've taken, what have you seen that has been positive? Has there been positive outtakes from your efforts? I know we're all dying. Sorry, Patty. We have to ask the Riot question. But because it kind of goes hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Riot had this incident or incidences, and you guys are taking those steps. And what are those steps, and what have you seen? What positive outcomes have come from that?
So I think what wasn't shared is I'm 7 months into Riot,
Yes.
right? And listen, I chose to take this job because I really, truly feel like the authenticity is there, the intentionality is there. You probably heard about our new character, Kasanti, coming out, who's queer and black, which is that intersectionality. So to your point of where we've been and where we are now, I think that it is, no pun intended, it is night and day, right? It isn't black and white, like as we like to say. So I think this is what I want to share, that every company I've ever worked for, I've always had to lead with why D&I is important. I have yet to do that at Riot. People know it's important. They know it's critical for the business. They just want help around the how, right? And that's what I'm there for. I'm going to help with the how, because I have no doubt that folks will help me drive this work. Because, folks, it's not just about the D&I people. Everyone has to, help with this. And I feel like everyone has my back, frankly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when we were talking, Patty, on the prep talk, that you mentioned that Riot they've gone past the why phase and now they're on the how phase.
Yeah.
And when we were talking internally, we were trying to figure out, okay, so what is important for us to actually bring to the stock, et cetera. And then we noticed that we have been doing the how. The why already was there, and we've been doing the how, but we couldn't make sure, like from our experience, to say how to implement that, because we've always, that's a good point, I guess, that we've always had that from start. So everything that we've been doing is about maintaining the culture, like in the hiring processes, like educating people who are coming in and are not really understanding all the importance of it. So being able to see like where Riot was and now it's been evolving, and I understand that you mentioned like character-wise, but that's only one part. And from what you're talking, I've seen that there are things that are going under the hood that we haven't even started seeing, and that's awesome.
It's super interesting too. I mean, as an independent developer, and having worked at big companies and small companies, it's really easy to listen to the experts talking about DEI and the importance, and sort of taking a step back and be like, well, that's not relevant to me because I'm not a 300-person company. But like, I go back to the strategy and how, from the beginning, if you're trying to build products, if you're trying to reach a diverse and global audience, like bringing those different perspectives in early, it helps shape that. And if that's the mindset for every studio early on, you're going to increase your chances for success. And it isn't something that you need to wait until like, okay, now that we're at this scale and we're experiencing backlash or anything. I think it's just, as a mindset, it's important to start early, and it should be across a wide range to prevent your company building something that's ultimately really niche.
Sorry,
sorry.
go ahead.
And I think that to your point, Aletheia, indeed, like we've been starting early. Like we can see some of the results searches. We have a lot of mouth-to-mouth, so sort of mouth-to-mouth marketing, where people like I've heard from PUGA, like they are inclusive, like they are hearing people, they're actually worried about that. And a lot of our talent attraction came from that. And not only in that regard, but also the entire retention that we have. We've heard a lot of people that like, yeah, I like to stay here because this is a very safe environment for me. Might it be a woman, a trans person, and that's been super, super healthy for us in terms of culture and like maintaining those people. And a lot of them actually get more engaged because of that. Because they're like, well, yeah, this is making me so good, I want to give it back a little bit.
So out of that, I think karma points are always really great, right? But how do we translate that into profitability, right? Like, is there something that you see from doing DEI rather than, just being a good person?
Yeah, I have to say that it would, in my career, when people say it's the right thing to do, well, hello, yeah, right? But I am very intentional about return on any investment and measuring outcomes, right? But there's different ways that you could do that, right? Our players are phenomenal and they're vocal. They will tell us, right, if they love something or if we can make some improvements, right? And so, and our rioters are also very vocal on this, and I love what you said about that safe space. That's a critical component of this, but as you know, for our games, the way that we make money, that's diversity, right, at its core. What do I want my, skin to be, right? In Valorant, all the different agents, because Valorant is depictive of the real world. And I want my agent to look like me, probably, right? And so that's where I think the profitability comes in, and we measure it based on sentiment, and we can also measure it by dollars, too.
It's funny, the karma points thing is such an interesting point, because that is the hardest thing for people to grok, where it's like, when you start a business, you're trying to build a successful business. Like, you don't win by having good,
being
like,
a good person
high karma.
necessarily, right? I mean, as shitty as that sounds, sorry.
A good human, period, right?
Yes.
And that's what, like, focusing on but it's like, okay, you need to hire the right people. You need to bring them in. And I think the best way to start there is by targeting people that are different than you, have different perspectives, because people tend to naturally want to surround themselves by people that are like themselves. And if you end up doing that, you're going to have a whole team of people that are thinking the same, and you're going to end up with a pretty narrow niche product. Where if people say, I want to hire the right person, but making that difference in perspective part of that process, you're just increasing your chance of having a diverse team, a diverse business, and that's going to give you good business outcomes.
And it's not only about like, and Patty's totally right, like it is the right thing, so that's a very important point. But even beyond that, like even thinking about profitability, like she was mentioning, again, going back to McKinsey report, it does show that companies that do adopt DEI, like from 2014 to 2020, they actually have profited more than those that didn't. It was more focused on the gender, but as a whole, it clearly makes sense that there is profitability involved in doing that.
Right.
So how do you hire for that? Like, is there something specific that you talk to recruiters about? Like, what do you look for exactly? Where can you go?
So I love the word intentionality, right? Because let's face it, folks, Riot doesn't have a hard time attracting people. We don't. But when we're looking at diversity, either from a gender perspective, ethnicity, we partner with organizations that focus on those communities, right? And so when we partner with them, they're literally able to help us source those candidates, right? Hey, Worlds is coming up November 5th at Chase Center in San Francisco. No shame in our game. We also capitalize on the fact that our business is doing these big activations. And so it's an opportunity for us to bring in the talent that I just mentioned to show them who Riot is. Right, because no better way to show them than to bring them to something like Worlds. And then with those partnerships, we're able to then, engage those folks. But it's a big thing for me to bring in candidates that are also very viable for the roles and who are the best at their craft. Because we've all done job fairs, right? They're all free-for-alls a lot of the time. So with these partnerships, we know we'll get the talent we want, and then we'll bring them in, and then we'll show them what Riot is about, and hopefully they'll make the choice to come join us, right? So.
Yeah. I mean, as an independent studio, it's like,
So everybody else who's not Riot.
We don't have the luxury we don't have the luxury or the resources to take a lot of those steps. I mean, I think if I were to give one bit of advice, it's like, from a mindset standpoint, like when you're looking at resumes, when you're interviewing people, latch on to differences. Don't fall into the trap of being like, oh, this person went to a school that I attended, or I'm familiar with the school, or we like the same things. Is approach differences as being a value add from the beginning, and think like, and it's not even the super visible stuff like gender or race. It's different economic backgrounds, even different games that people like to play. Because if you bring in those different perspectives as you're building product, as you're throwing ideas back and forth across the table, then it's gonna shape everything. And I mean, going back to like looking at a resume, if you think like, oh, this person went to a different school, embrace that. And then reach out, like target schools that may have like a more diverse student base to say like target them for internships, but just start by embracing differences. I think it's just the best way for success.
Right.
Yeah, that makes total sense, Aletheia. And I think the key is always to try to strive for balance in terms of you need to embrace diversity and differences, but also to understand like, will this make sense for our team? Like when working together, like are they in some way in the same wavelength in general? And that's something that we try to go for when we're in our hiring processes. Given that, again, like we're in a culture that is already very established, so we're trying to understand like what are the right questions to, and how do we how do you do that is by basically going through the hiring process and telling them about the diverse leadership that we have. Like there's me, there's Julia, which is the head of 2D, who's a female, and then there's Lucas, which is a black man, as one of the key leadership of the company as well. And during the process, we actually make sure that, is this making sense to you? Like, and how do they react to that, right? Just to make sure that when they come in, it is making sense both for them and for us. And sometimes both the candidate would say like, well, this is different for me, it might not make sense for me, as well as on our end, that sort of happened, where the HR would come in, I'm not sure if that person would actually make sense because some of the core values that we have are not seen and perceived in that person.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just, because I want to recognize that not everybody has like the resources like we do.
Yeah.
And thank you for pointing that out, because I do want to share something that I think everyone can apply, and that's kind of the rigor behind the interviewing, like you were saying. We do have a process that I feel everyone can integrate. It's, after we're all done interviewing a candidate, we all come in the room together and we have almost like a third-party person listening to feedback and then identifying when bias-loaded language comes up and checks the person and says, well, what do you mean by that? And I love what you said about differences. And so thinking about what do we really need from someone to do the job versus what do we want, right? I think that's important. So thank you for pointing that out, because I'm sitting in a place of a lot of resources too, right? And I think the intentionality is really critical regardless.
Totally. So given that, is there ever a point where like your search for DEI can be sort of like problematic? Like if you're like, does it come to where it's like you're too focused on this to where the product or the person is not the right fit?
I don't think we've had the challenge, for example, to see someone that's super technically good in something, like a super senior person, but didn't fit at all into the company. So we didn't have the opportunity to have this sort of challenge. But I'm sure that's at some point, like for more junior levels, or even some mid levels, where we were like, well, yeah, like this, it would be interesting to move on with this candidate, but this doesn't make sense for us as a whole.
It's a tough one because, I mean, ultimately finding someone who's a good fit is the most important, it's the most important thing for business, for culture, especially in a smaller team, but even across bigger organizations. Like, you need to have people who are a good fit and are going to move things forward. Yes, it's finding, again, it's honing in on something,
right,
where it's, what's the right way to say this? It's honing in on someone that has a good fit and contributing a new perspective and moving your business forward while still fitting into that agenda, like the diverse agenda. And so it's not a checklist mentality where it's like you need to be like, oh, they're fitting this box, box. It's more organic, and it's like, I think as long as you have the right mindset when you're approaching it, you're just increasing your chances for success.
Yeah. So for me, when I hear someone use the word fit, to me that goes, oh, bias-loaded language. Doesn't mean that their intention is to be biased, but that's where I use appreciative inquiry, and I come in and I go, tell me more about what you mean around fit, right? And then if they say they didn't go to the school that I like, then that's a different conversation, right? No one wants to work with folks that are not aligned with the culture we're trying to build, but at the same time, it's a contradiction, right? When we're saying difference.
Yes.
Right? And then, but you gotta fit in our culture. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but I think being open and having very clear dialogue around that and rigor behind that, I think is critical. But you always have to cast the net really wide when looking at candidates. But what do? We're rushing. We wanna hire very quickly because we gotta get this done. Pause and take some time, and then think about Next time you hear someone say they're not the right fit, challenge them. Find out what it means. It may be something very valid, and it may be something very biased.
Yeah, I like that.
I think it's not necessarily like, and I totally agree with you, that is embracing difference and making sure that whoever is coming in is also embracing difference. Whatever that background is it like a different economical, racial, whatever, gender. If that person is as open as you are, and naturally, like you mentioned, you have deadlines that you have to go for. But I mean, that everything is making sense. I do think that embracing difference at the end of the day will make the whole difference.
So I want to talk a little bit about like producing a product in game design. How do you bring DEI into that?
Well, we're the big player here, right? So I'll just say that we do have a structure. I have a person on my team that actually works with product and partnerships, and we bring together a variety of writers to consult from various backgrounds. Listen, creating an agent, a character champion takes months, 9 months at minimum. So getting ahead of that is clear. But I think one of the drivers around doing this is, what does our world look like? Are we representing what's happening in the world? But the bigger thing is, like, is this going to be relevant 10, 20 years from now, right? As our player base grows, that's really important for us, because the last thing we want is for someone to go, oh, that's old and stodgy. We want people to see it 10 years from now, new players like you were mentioning, and go, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense, I love it. So we have a lot of rigor behind that. It's very difficult when you're working with real world, Valorant, fantasy world, series like Arcane. How are you depicting these things in a way that's culturally authentic, relevant to people, but also fits in the story?
Yep.
Yeah.
So looking at our audience, I mean, our audience is predominantly female, and we have a whole range of demographics, different users, and for us, having a diverse team has ultimately translated into better connecting with our user and our customer, and which is why we've had the strategy from the beginning. But it's, and I'm going to keep hammering on this point, but it really is like, if you have a diverse mindset, a diverse strategy from the beginning, building your team, building your product, it's going to translate into better success with your player base, or at least have a better chance of targeting a diverse player base.
I can't speak specifically for game design because we're not art outsourced studio, but I think that the same way that having, and that's something that I just mentioned Aletheia and Patty, which is regarding authenticity, right? When you have the diverse team, they are going to come from it when they're coming in and giving solutions. They're going to think from their different backgrounds, and it's going to sound real, their solutions, because they've been through that, right? So like when you're creating a piece of art for global clients, we have to keep that in mind, and we need those teams to be also think and be inserted into that.
So we have a minute and a half left. I know that kind of flew by. I have so many more questions.
Look at all your cards.
I know. I wanted to open up the floor. Does anybody have anything that they want to ask? Anything? Oh, yes.
One right there.
Hello?
Hi.
What would you do to recommend to a company that wants to be more diverse, but somebody like myself isn't in the day-to-day interview process with some of the people, and you want to make sure that the people that you have in your team making those decisions aren't biased or making these decisions in a biased way?
I mean, if I can field that, when you have your team members looking at resumes or talking to people, again, it's humans tend to latch on to the things that are similar to themselves during that process. And if you look at them and just jump on differences or jump on the things that you might label as a mismatch for your company, for your culture early on, and have the people that are doing so it's like it's going to increase the chance that you bring someone in that offers a diverse or different perspective in general. So
I'm looking at that countdown clock.
I know, stop
Melissa,
looking.
sorry.
where's the countdown clock?
Right there.
Right there.
Oh, look,
Oh,
we're over time.
we're done.
Yeah, I could just say this. Like, I think that's pretty loaded. Like, there's a lot you could do technically, right? I've been in companies where we've scrubbed resumes, take names off, take addresses off, take schools off, just had skill set on there. I've had companies that change job description language. I worked for an organization when we took 24/7 out because it was a data center, the amount of women that applied went up 30% in a year. So it's really understanding those things that could prompt someone not to apply, but it's also something where what's creating the bias in people that are looking at that, you can consider that. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of companies are like interviewers. You just ask the same questions, because what happens in an interview? You're like, oh, your parents with, and then it becomes like this love fest, and that person gets, some preferential treatment possibly, right? So I'm happy to talk to you about that, but there's a lot of things you could do, and it might seem mechanical when you're dealing with like a human type of situation, but might be a great place to start.
I think from a company, again, that might not have as many resources, one thing that could be done, and I'm assuming that if you, if any leader has already that in mind, I'm pretty sure someone or a few people in your team also have those concerns in mind, even if not anyone. So what I could advise is try to put those people together, people who are focused and who are worried about that. Try to listen to them and how can they help during either through the hiring processes or even how to educate people in the best possible manner inside your company. So it's not only to start building the culture that will eventually lead just to maintenance, the culture maintenance, but also to start understanding what are the key differences from those people who are on the day-to-day work. Like, what do they feel? Like, what are they being listened? Like, those people that are worried, they will definitely be key on helping you during this process of, let's say, transition, of actually implementing more DEI agendas in your company.
That's great.
Anything else? All right. Oh,
Yeah, there's one.
one more.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I might cut in too.
No, go ahead. We'll do it
Oh.
quickly.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I'm a official content creator for this game title of like 63 million players.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's one of the biggest ones, I think. And recently they got a lot of backlash, especially on Twitter and TikTok, for the characters they release being like non-diverse, not very inclusive, especially like making skin tones like really light, for example. And a lot of people, especially in North America, they're really upset about this. And they've we've sent a lot of emails to them, but it doesn't seem like they really care or listen because they're like the company is like Chinese, and their main player base, which are a lot of Chinese players, they don't seem to really voice the same concerns as the player base here. So yeah, I get a lot of attention from like a lot of viewers who have been asking me to like voice opinions since they know I have this connection to this company. Yeah, I'm not really sure like what could be done or what is the best approach to go about this, or if I can, I don't know, form a coalition with like other creators of my size to represent like people here. What advice would you have for that?
Oh, I think that's a really kind of deep question.
Come find us after,
Yeah.
and because
Yeah.
it's a long question, and we're running over.
Yeah.
Let's talk
We're
after.
being bullied by the
I know,
monitor.
but
It's flashing at us.
I know.
Go
Thank
away.
you guys
Go away.
so much. Thank
Yeah.
you guys.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Walk off the
Let's go up this.
All right. So thank you to Melissa, Miguel, Aletheia, and Patty for the great conversation. So in our next session, our panelists will focus on how to have healthy conversations about NFTs online without getting people mad at you. Key, how to have a healthy conversation about NFTs without getting people mad at you. So please welcome to the stage Brooks Brown, CEO of Consortium 9, James Wing, Business Development Principal at NC Partners, and Maddie Fairchild, Senior Director,